The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
This is Gerard with episode number 22 of Florida's Fresh Mix on the Florida Podcast Network, a random mix of Florida's freshest personalities. Listen in.
Hello. This is Amber, the production assistant for the Florida Podcast Network, and welcome to Florida's Fresh Mix podcast. As always, I am here with your host, Gerard.
Hey there.
Ready for part 2 of what I think is considered one of your best interviews to date?
Well, I would like to say I was born ready, but I was not ready for this interview. There's no way for me to have been able to prepare for how great this interview is going to be and all the topics that it covers. So Latrice really brought it, and I really appreciated every minute of it.
You're absolutely right. Latrice Sampson Richards of Afros and Audio brought it. And she, like many of our guests, dropped bombs of knowledge on us. Very enlightening, very insightful. So if you didn't hear part 1, you should go back. It was our last episode. Go back right now. Stop what you're doing. Listen to part 1. And then come back here and listen to part 2.
We'll be right here. We're not going anywhere.
Nope. We will be right here because you can't miss this part 2.
Part 1 kind of dealt with a lot of the historical context behind, the need for something like Afros and Audio and the Vanguard Podcast Network. Part 2 also touches upon that as well. But what I really appreciate about part 2 of the interview is her discussion about how, podcasting is such a different medium because, of the low barriers to entry, and you can get in and talk about whatever you want and anybody can do it. It's low cost to get started and nobody can tell you not to do it. You don't need a, network executive to tell you what to do, or is your pilot going to get picked up, what topic to talk about. And so she really delves into the nitty gritty of that. And I really, really appreciate it as someone who is a relatively new podcaster on the scene and loves podcasting tremendously. I thought it was very poignant.
It's the people's medium, if you ask me. I mean,
I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Okay. Yeah, because even if you look at, let's say, TikTokers or YouTubers, they're mediums that people can do without having much experience, without, like you said, Gerard, having some big wig tell you what to do, tell you can't sound this way, you have to sound this way, or you can't talk about this and that. There's so much freedom in podcasting, and it was really refreshing to hear a fellow podcaster talk about that in that way. It's very encouraging. So if you're thinking about creating a podcast, go for it. Just go for it, because you can. Definitely. All you need is a phone, like what Latrice said, and give it your best shot. There's so many tools. Hit up producer Jaime.
No doubt.
Please,
no doubt.
Hit her up.
You beat me to the plug. You beat me to the plug.
She loves teaching people about podcasting and just educating them on this new medium that, like I said before in episode 21, it has not peaked yet. There is so much potential in this space for everyone.
Definitely.
And like what Latrice said, it is the great equalizer, and you will hear more about that coming up.
I'm getting excited already.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's tune in to part 2, Latrice Sampson Richards of Afros and Audio.
So Latrice, tell me, and this is the most critical question I have for you. What is your why?
My personal why is to help Black people in particular to heal. That's really what it is at the end of the day. And whatever means we choose to take to that end, then that's what it is. But I really believe that through the use of creativity and melding that creativity with the, science of behavior and the science of human existence and the human experience, that we can help to facilitate that healing. I think when it comes to Afros and Audio and everything that we're doing in the podcasting space, the why is very similar in that it's about making sure that Black people feel heard, that we are recognized for our skill levels, and that our stories are told in a very creative and authentic kind of way. We want to make sure that Black stories are authored by Black authors, by Black people, versus, being told by people who have no idea of the reality of what it means to be Black. And so, in my opinion, all of that lends itself to the healing of our people in general.
One thing that you've said in the past really stood out to me, which was that podcasting, you love podcasting because it's quote unquote the great equalizer. Mm-hmm. And I thought about that a lot. And because I'm, now I guess in the industry, I was thinking about how long the movie industry has existed, how long the television industry has existed. And, your point, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, but it's the quote unquote baby of entertainment right now. I think those are your words. And, it's such a nascent industry that we can get in from the jump, as opposed to kind of fighting for our positions and our roles and our ownership, in the movie and the film industries that have existed for so long. Although we're starting to see some progress there, but it's progress as opposed to starting from the beginning.
Absolutely. Podcasting is the great equalizer. There's a relatively low barrier to entry. Literally anyone can start a podcast. All you need is a cell phone, and maybe not even a cell phone, to be honest, a device that can record. So whatever that looks like, back in the day, we used to, I don't know about y'all, but I used to record on the cassette tape. You put the little tape over the tape and then you record from the radio that way. So
come on, we all did it. I used to record off the radio. We all had our mixtapes and record off the radio, and you have to try to time it so that you cut out all the, the stuff at the end. And
absolutely. So it really is, that simple. There's a relatively low barrier to entry, and there's not a lot of skill necessarily needed to start a podcast. And so it is
not from a technology standpoint.
Correct.
But hopefully you've got skill in delivering good content. Right.
Well, absolutely. And even if you don't have the skill in delivering good content to begin, that doesn't mean that you can't still begin. The hardest part of podcasting is starting, because we get in our heads and we get so self-conscious about our abilities and things like that. And so we always stress to them that just starting somewhere is the most important piece, because the more you do it, the more skill sets you grow, the better you get at it. You start to figure out what your own flow is. You start to figure out what your style is and what type of podcaster you want to be. But you can't get to that point if you don't first start. And so because there's a relatively low barrier to entry in terms of equipment, in terms of, skill sets, and in terms of, even the ability to distribute your content, now there's free options for everything, editing and all of that. And so because of that relatively low barrier to entry, it minimizes the amount of gatekeeping that happens in this industry. Whereas in those other more traditional industries like television, like film, and even in the literary world, there's so many gatekeepers that, if this person doesn't think that you're good enough, then you're not good enough. And if that person doesn't think you're good enough, then your stuff never even gets off the ground. With podcasting, you have an opportunity to speak directly to your audience. With social media, you have an opportunity to connect directly with your audience, and you don't have to ask for permission to be able to do that. And so you can tell your story in your voice the way that you see fit, and your audience will gravitate toward that because that's what they've been looking for. That's what they've been wanting. Edison did the Black Listener Report, which was a series of research that they conducted about the listening habits of Black people. And one of the things that stood out to me more so than anything else was when they looked at the categories, like the top 10 that the general population tends to listen to more often. And then they looked at the top 10 for Black people. Those categories were very different. But when they asked those same Black people if they would be willing to listen to those other categories, if there was a Black host or if the topic was covered from a Black perspective, those numbers went through the roof. And so what that shows is that there's something for everybody. There is an audience for everyone. It's not that Black people are not interested in certain categories or certain topics. It's that we want to hear authentic experiences in those areas. We need to be able to connect to that information in a way that is uniquely ours. And so I think that opens the door for anyone who's interested in doing a podcast, no matter how much experience you have, no matter how much money you have to put into it, to say my audience is out there. And if I'm creating the content, I have the opportunity to connect with them and nobody can stop me from doing that. And I think that's powerful.
That's interesting. And it reminds me of how often I've told people, like in the movie industry in particular. And I think that notwithstanding recent controversies, the Cosby Show really hit on this point, which is that why can't you just have a movie that just deals on non-racial topics and just happens to have brown people in it? And it has nothing to do with race, slavery, anything, just, an action movie or just a drama, just has nothing to do with race, and just brown people are in it. Right. And I think that's what was part of the global appeal and the universal appeal of the Cosby Show in particular. And I think that, with podcasts, you can do the same thing, just talking about topics that kind of transcend race, but at the same time, because we've been so critical in formulating the culture and the fashion, the music, and so much in American culture, why can't podcasts be a springboard for that type of exposure, before other people can claim it? And I'm talking about intellectual property rights, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let me ask you this. If I am a potential client, customer, or aspiring podcaster, and I'm looking at Afros and Audio, or I'm looking at Vanguard Podcast Network, how am I going to decide which one to approach or, try to deal with?
With Afros and Audio, if you are a Black podcaster or an audio professional who is looking for community, who's looking for opportunities to connect with other Black creatives and audio professionals, who's looking for opportunities to collaborate with other Black podcasters and audio professionals, then you can, join our community network. We have it's a community network that's hosted by, or powered rather, by the Mighty Networks. It's an app and it's a whole built-in community that we have where we learn and we interact and all of that. You can follow us on Instagram and things like that and just be a part of that community. So if you're looking for a safe space to land, if you're looking for inspiration, if you're just looking to be around like-minded people, then be a part of the Afros and Audio community. If you are a creative that needs support with creating a project, let's say you have the idea, you have the vision, but you lack some of the technical skills, or you just don't have time to do those things, then you can work with Vanguard through our pro services that we offer, our pro services model that we offer, where we do editing and we help you to launch your podcast or put that podcast together or develop that podcast. We actually partner with various community members who do various different tasks. So we have editors, we have storyboard editors, we have sound designers, we have, anything that you could need to get your podcast off the ground, we actually work with those community members to put together projects for individuals who hire us to help them. If you are a podcast listener and you're looking to hear authentic, relatable Black stories, then you can listen to some of the content that we're putting out. We have 2 shows that we're putting out or working on currently. One actually we just released. It's called the Turnaround Podcast, and it's a really, really great story of a former basketball player who, he's from the hood, and he just talks about his life experiences, and he talks about what it was like for him kind of going through the ups and downs of, making it and then falling off and then trying to figure it all out again, and then we are working on another series called Stories All Around Us. That's actually going to be releasing in February after the new year. It's a storytelling podcast where Black folk tell their stories and give different perspectives around a single topic every week. And so that's I'm actually producing that show and hosting that show. So I'm excited about that. So we really have something for everybody. We have, whatever it is that you need, whatever it is that you, want to take in, whatever it is that you want to get out of that experience, we got it for you.
What are your short-term goals? I know that you've said that you wanted to create a gig system among other goals. Could you expand on that a little bit? Because I can predict what you're going to say, and probably that, you want to give people who have maybe an idea and they just don't know the right outlet, and maybe they want to express themselves through a podcast, et cetera, and they don't know where they can find a home or they can find guidance. So what are your short-term goals for what you're trying to accomplish with Afros and Audio and Vanguard Podcast Network?
Absolutely. So our founder is Talib Jasir, and he has a really clear vision. I actually believe that he is a visionary, to be honest. He has a really clear vision about what the organization is and where the organization is going. In the short term, right now, we're looking at growing our community. So we are putting a lot of emphasis in 2022 on outreach and just introducing ourselves to our community and getting out there and letting our community know that we exist and that we would love to have them be a part of the community. But when it comes to our long-term goals, I think it's about creating equity in the space and making sure that Black voices are heard and respected in this industry, and really kind of, taking the charge on, or taking the lead, I think is a better word, on making that happen and creating those opportunities and expanding the Afros and Audio umbrella so much so that we are able to provide certifications and certain skill sets and things like that. And, we want to be able to have a network that is thriving. We want to have a place, a safe space for Black podcasters to be able to figure out what kind of podcaster they want to be and to have that room to grow that a lot of other creatives tend to get and that Black creatives a lot of times don't always have. And so it's really just about expanding the community, expanding the learning opportunities, expanding the collaboration opportunities, and expanding the opportunities for partnership and monetization for anyone who's interested in taking their podcast to that place or to that level.
By the way, I love the word monetization, although, when I use it, which, is common parlance in my profession, but monetization is how you make money from what you love and what you're doing. So always monetize.
Absolutely.
It seems obvious to us, but sometimes I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, what do you mean monetize? So I'm glad that you mentioned that word. And you have said that Black media is having a renaissance movement. That sounds positive. We've talked in this interview about kind of the pitfalls of the movie and the entertainment industry in general, including TV, and how Black folks have had to really catch up. And we're just now seeing some progress in that respect. For you to say that the Black media is having a renaissance movement, that sounds very positive. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think it's just the times that we're in. I mean, there is so much creativity that's happening in the Black community right now. And there always has been. But I think that we have gone through periods where Black expression has been censored in a lot of ways. The Black narrative, or the narrative of what it means to be a Black person, has always kind of been shaped and molded by non-Black people. And so it kind of has been sprinkled with these outside ideas or these caricatures, if you will. And so we are seeing right now a lot of young Black creatives across multiple industries, really all industries, that are finally being given the freedom to create things that are authentic and things that are relevant to the times, and fully document what's happening in this time period. I think a huge part of, what one might consider to be a Renaissance period is not just about, the creation itself, but it's about the documentation of history. And so we're seeing that right now. We saw that, back in the days with the Harlem Renaissance, they documented their experiences, and they documented it in their music, in their poetry, in their film, in their television. They documented their experiences and the reality of what it meant to be Black during that time period. And that's exactly what's happening right now. We have shows like Insecure, which is, it's a cultural icon, like just hands down. Insecure goes in the book of all-time cultural favorites. We have new shows that are coming out like Harlem. In terms of like television and streaming services, Harlem is so relatable, and it's so it just feels like a Black woman made the show, right? About Black women for Black women. And so many Black women that I know, myself included, have really connected to it. We're seeing podcasting that really depicts the reality of our lives, and not just the boys in the hood kind of version of it, right? Because everybody didn't grow up in the hood. I did not grow up in the hood. I grew up in a middle-class family. I went to private school, but that was the only thing my family could afford. We didn't get summer clothes. We didn't get the latest Nikes or anything like that. We got education, right? And my parents put their money into making sure that we had a solid education, but we didn't get nothing else.
Girl, I feel you 100%. I grew up in Boca Raton. People are like, oh, you grew up in like a really rich part of Florida, and yeah, I did. But yeah, I mean, my sister and I both know that my parents sacrificed everything to put us in private school, and we were like the poorest kids in school, and obviously poor is not poorest, but the least. We were super middle class, and we had nothing else left. My parents struggled. They poured all their money into our education, and all my friends were rich, with some exceptions. But what you just described is, I can completely relate.
Yeah, but that story doesn't always get told, because that story doesn't always fit the narrative. It's either you got to be from the hood, or you got to be so rich that you're looking down on everybody else. It's either hood or elitist. And there's not a whole lot of that middle ground. I mean, even the Huxtables, Cliff was a doctor and Claire was a lawyer. My parents had government jobs. You know what I'm saying? Like, they had steady jobs, but they were government employees.
Believe it or not, that was my one complaint about the Cosby Show, is that, why did you have to make them the two most stereotypically elite professions in America?
Because those are the only two things that were acceptable at the time.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah. And so we're seeing right now that that narrative is starting to change, and we're seeing a much more well-rounded view of Blackness. And we're seeing it not only, Blackness in America, but we're seeing Blackness across the diaspora. And we're seeing that there's a lot of similarities between Black folk in this part of the world and Black folk in that part of the world and Black folk in that other part of the world. I was watching YouTube a couple months ago, and there was a clip from a Family Feud in South Africa, which I didn't even know they were doing Family Feud in South Africa. And so Steve Harvey asked a question, and the question was, name something that everybody's grandmother has in their room divider. And they went into this whole spiel about what a room divider is. And so for them, a room divider is what we would call a china cabinet, right? Now, my mama got a china cabinet in her house right now, and it's full of china that's been in there for at least the last 30 years. And we have not touched that china in at least the last 30 years because that's her good plates, and you better not touch them good plates, right? They have, it's the exact same thing in South Africa, the exact same thing. They just call it a room divider. And so we're realizing that there's a lot more that connects us than that divides us. And that's a completely different narrative than we've been fed for, at the very least, my entire life. I'll be 40 next year. The narrative has always been that, Africans are, malnourished with their stomachs poking out, and that Americans are hoodlums and gangsters and live in the hood and they crack whores and all of this other stuff. And so because of this renaissance that we're going through right now, because of the internet, because of podcasting, it's opening up the world view or the world understanding of who we are as a people, and also getting us to see each other as family versus seeing each other as adversaries. And so I'm really excited to be a part of, it's an exciting time to be a creative right now. It's a very exciting time to be a creative because we have a lot more freedom than creatives have had in the past. I think part of that is, because there's a lot more people of color who are in positions of power in the industry, which took years and decades to even get to that point. But because there is more, not enough, but more than there once were, there's more opportunities for us to be able to tell our own stories. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
I think that's right. And we've had such a great conversation. I feel like this will go on forever, but I feel like I just want to, make sure that we get in, first of all, I want to give you your flowers for what you've created here in the podcast space. That means personally a lot to me as a person of color who's in the podcast space. But at the same time, I just want to make sure that you tell us if you have any events or anything else coming up that you would like to promote while you're here with me on the mic.
So I don't have any specific events that I would like to share at this moment. But one of the things that we are very much interested in doing is, like I said, getting out there, outreaching, introducing ourselves to our audience. So we will be releasing the dates and locations for kind of like a little mini tour that we're going to be doing with some pop-up events across the country throughout the year for 2022, where we're just kind of getting out there. We're staying safe and, making sure that we take whatever precautions we need to take for everyone to be safe. But we also want to get in there and actually be in community with our community. We want to fellowship. We want to enjoy you all. We want to meet you all. And so we would love for you all to follow us on Instagram at Afros and Audio, or you can go to our website at afrosandaudio.com to find out about our upcoming events. On the website, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can sign up for our newsletter, which we send out every week, kind of giving you information about what we have have going on, any special features, any opportunities for collaboration, or anything like that. You can also find out about our community network on the website. It's a great place to just congregate and meet like-minded individuals, but also to learn, to gain actual tangible skills that you can apply to your podcasting experience, but also to life in general. And so we're really excited about those things. With Vanguard, we have an app that we're working on for the Vanguard Podcast Network and for Afros and Audio as well. So we got some really exciting things that are coming down the pike. We have a lot of organizations that have reached out that want to work with us. And so that'll create even more opportunities for us to be able to connect with our audience, or with our community rather. And we always, just stress to our community that the community is built by the community. And so if you have a skill set, if you have a message, if you have something that you can add to our community, let us know, because we believe in partnering with our community members to make things happen, whether that's a learning opportunity, whether that is a creative opportunity or a partnership or whatever that needs to be. We're always open to doing that, because that's who we are.
Well, that's great. I mean, I hope that you now consider yourself to be part of the Florida Podcast Network community. Yes. And we'll definitely be interested in following you and your progress and continued success and continued outreach. The last question I have for you, and I said that this is just personal, it's not related to the podcast, but here's the question. If I were, as a Black man, going to approach the Vanguard Podcast Network, and I said, I want to start a podcast that either is about Biggie being the greatest rapper of all time or Tupac being the greatest rapper of all time, and you had to decide which one I would be allowed to do, which one would you pick?
Oh, listen, I would have to sit that one out. I'm not going to lie, because one, I'm not a hip hop head, and, blackness comes in all different types, Gerard. You know what I'm saying? We are not a monolith.
Oh, come on. You're killing me.
I am not a hip hop head. I'm more of like a Erykah Badu, Jill Scott, Ari Lennox kind of girl.
Okay. All right.
But don't get me wrong now. I enjoy a little Cardi B, a little Meg Thee Stallion as well. Okay. But any given day, my playlist might, have a little bit of Biggie, a little bit of Tupac, a little bit of Lauren, a little bit of, everybody on there. So my taste in music is very eclectic. But I really can't call it, because Biggie got some bangers and Tupac got some bangers too. And I think, honestly, if I could be all the way real with you, because there's no reason for me to believe I can't be, right? I hate that comparison between Biggie and Tupac, because they're two very different artists. Biggie is, a little bit more, I would say, like a commercial artist, in the sense of, he talks about his experiences and things like that, and he gonna give you a nice little bop. And I feel like while he's talking about really, significant topics, he was able to do so in a way that felt really lighthearted at times, and so that's a skill set that in my opinion has never really been replicated. And Tupac is the kind of artist that, when you're listening to a Tupac song, you're gonna get the bop as well. You're gonna shake your booty a little bit and all of that. He's giving you some bangers. But when you really sit down and listen to the lyrics of his songs, I think Tupac is a little bit more spiritual than Biggie is. And so I don't think it's a fair comparison. And I hate that we feel like we have to choose because, there can only be one. When it comes to Black folk, there could only be one. And so I'm not choosing. I think, Biggie is the greatest in his own right. And I think Tupac is the greatest in his own right. And I think that's a sufficient answer for me,
Well, I love that. I always tell people that it's kind of a trick question because, in my opinion, Biggie is the greatest lyricist of all time. And you can talk about Eminem, whatever, but Eminem wouldn't have to step up his game if Biggie
Eminem could
out.
never.
Yeah, all right. So, all right.
Eminem could never.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but they're building blocks to skill sets, right?
Yeah.
So if Biggie hadn't been the greatest lyricist of all time, Eminem would not have been clearly not as good. Neither would Jigga or whatever. But I always say that Biggie's the greatest lyricist of all time, and Tupac's the greatest rapper of all time. Why? Because Biggie could make you dance, but Tupac would make you think, and that's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, anyway. I love that. I love that. Absolutely.
All right. Well, look, this has been such a wonderful interview, and it's actually my producer probably could confirm this is the longest interview we've done, but I'm extremely happy about it. I was having a rough day in my lawyerdom, and I told Amber ahead of time that I was looking forward to this because it would be a nice break in my day. And so I really appreciate you. So thanks so much for gracing us with your presence and sharing your views on so many important topics. I look forward to following your journey and the progress of Afros and Audio and the Vanguard Podcast Network. And hopefully we can continue to have some collaborations in the future. Thank you so much, Latrice.
Thank you for having me.
Latrice Sampson Richards, folks. Well, that was the second half of my amazing interview with Latrice Sampson Richards. And, I can't tell which interview I enjoyed the most or blew me away the most. But that one was definitely another very inspiring one. I find it difficult to pull a specific topic to discuss in this fresh take. But I do think that it's somewhat timely because now we've got this, this whole debate raging over critical race theory and what people think it means and what it actually means. Now, as an attorney, I actually know what it means. And the fact of the matter is critical race theory is primarily taught in law school. It's almost never taught outside of law school. So when people are, trying to ban the teaching of it in all these states, I, as an attorney, know that makes no sense because it's not taught to people who aren't in law school anyway. So at the end of the day, regardless of what side of the quote unquote controversy you fall on, I think that an organization like Afros and Audios gives certain people whose, history, first of all, has not been taught nearly in depth as it should have, historically in the United States, but also now is being banned altogether. And by banned, meaning that, the teaching of slavery in different ways and Black history and, some of the challenges of what we've had to go through as a nation are being, teachers are losing their jobs over it and it's causing a lot of problems at school board meetings, et cetera. So, hey, look, when you have groups like Afros and Audios creating additional content, it gives them more parents and teachers and whoever else more media to share these stories. For instance, I will admit I had never even heard of the Tulsa Massacre until Watchmen was coming out, and I'm a pretty educated dude, but it was not taught in school. My education on Black history was limited mostly to, okay, slavery existed, and then it just fast forwarded to a little bit of Jim Crow and counting jelly beans in a jar to go vote, and then Martin Luther King, and then it kind of just stopped. And it was like, I'd say a week of teaching at the most, okay? And everything else that you learn about Black history came from your parents or from, reading books on your own. So there's so many aspects to African-American history that there probably aren't enough podcasts to cover them all. But you have options and you broaden the scope of those options through the Vanguard Podcast Network and Afros and Audios. And I think that is a good thing. When you listen to podcasts, I think that the medium is progressing in such a way that people are getting so creative. It's really become like those radio broadcasts of the past before television, with sound effects. And some people are just really good actors and it really sounds like a well put together radio show, you can bring your audience into that period of history. Or you can just lecture about it. I mean, podcasts give you so many different opportunities to teach histories that may or may not be available in the classroom today. So that is my fresh take. I really hope that you had a chance to listen to both parts of my interview with Latrice Sampson Richards, and that it's given you some food for thought. It definitely did the same for me and allowed me to kind of think more deeply and about some topics that I haven't thought about in a while, and gave me a chance to express them. So thank you for being here and listening to these stories and these opinions and these points of view. We look forward to having you back for the next episode of the Fresh Mix podcast. For details and show notes about today's show and our guest, go to freshmixpodcast.com. I would really love your feedback both on today's guest and on my fresh take. The Florida Podcast Network has a closed Facebook group exclusively for super fans of their shows like Florida's Fresh Mix. So we all look forward to hanging out in there with you. Just search for FPN Insiders on Facebook to leave us comments, get early scoops, contests, and other special treats. Or you can complain about Florida and how at this time of year, you get all the snowbirds. All the snowbirds are people that fly down, literally, that's hence the name snowbirds, from New York, New Jersey, and other places that are cold as bleep and come here and flood my town. And they, lines get longer and it gets more crowded and the traffic gets worse. And it's just a nightmare. And it's going to happen every year for perpetuity until, I guess, Miami Beach is underwater. So until that happens, I'm just going to, keep complaining about it. Anyway, be sure to visit all the great shows on the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at floridapodcastnetwork.com. Keep catching Who's Fresh in the Florida Mix with Florida's Fresh Mix podcast.
Flintstone Media has been the digital messaging bedrock of several brands and businesses, serving as a highly resourceful podcast production house and consultancy firm for over 6 years. Visit flintstonemedia.com for podcast samples. From show development and setup through recording and distribution, work with a leader in the industry and add a new podcast to your brand's content offerings. That's flintstonemedia.com.